Hello everyone, my name is Renee. Today I'm going to be going over the basics of Grasshopper within Rhino. For those of you who don't know, Rhino is a 3D modeling software. As you can see here, it uses what's called NURBS that allows you to create freeform shapes within its space. It basically gives you a lot more creative freedom when you're 3D modeling geometry, which I really enjoy. It also has what's called Grasshopper 3D built into it. Here's the Wikipedia page. Grasshopper is a visual programming language, which I know seems intimidating, but it's actually not once you get the hang of it. It allows you to create parametric design using algorithms instead of having to manually model and hand draw each thing. Some examples here, can you imagine having to model each and every piece of this geometry in Rhino or Revit? It would just take a very long time. Let's get started. So what you're going to do today, I'm going to be using Rhino 7. You can see it here. For those of you who are not as familiar with Rhino, that's okay. We can just work in the Grasshopper space. You don't really need to know that much Rhino. Basically how it works is it has different viewports. Here's the top viewport, front, right, perspective, etc. You can create your own. It works like AutoCAD, so you can type in a command. I'm going to type in point. And you can drop the point in your space physically, or you can just put the location at 0. And you can see now it exists in my model space. It works in the X, Y, and Z direction, X, Y, and Z axes here. Great. So now we're going to open up Grasshopper. So in the old days, you would have to download Grasshopper separately. Today, though, it is already built into your Rhino software. So I'm just going to type in Grasshopper, and my canvas appears here. So now let's go over the basics of how Grasshopper works and the anatomy of it. This is what's called a canvas. This is where your art is going to go for Grasshopper. I'm going to pull it to the side. Okay, so the way it works is Grasshopper is built of components. You can see these different tabs here. These are all the components I currently have in my space. Don't be intimidated. I have a ton of different ones downloaded, and I'll go through how I got those. Go through and see all the different components, and they're sorted into subcategories. If you want to know how a certain component works, go to the website Grasshopper Docs. Basically what it does is it lists a component index. You can see here they have 8,000 on here. But you can go down, you can pick a random one, say for maths, you want to see what construct domain is. Here it tells you the inputs that go into that component, which I'll go over in a sec. It'll tell you the ID, what it is, and the type that goes into it, and its output, what that component is going to create. Okay, so if you are like me and you find the components that are already built into Grasshopper aren't enough, you want to do other actions, you can go to the website called Food for Rhino. This website has a bunch of different components that developers upload. A lot of them are free, some of them cost money. I've never had to pay for one, but I'm sure there's great ones out there. One that I use all the time called Ladybug. Ladybug is a weather analysis tool. It allows you to analyze different things like sun paths, daylighting studies, etc. You can see here there's a bunch of different snips of what it can do. Energy analysis, airflow, etc. Some of these may not make any sense to you, and that's okay. Radiation, etc. You can do, if you want to keep this, you can see it's free. Its license cost is free. Go down to the version you want. Usually I pick the latest one. You can log in with a free account. I logged in with my school email. You're gonna hit download. Once that downloads, you're going to go to your Grasshopper window again, hit File, select Special Folders, and hit Components folder. So this folder lives on your C drive. It's where all your components live for your Grasshopper files. You're going to drag and drop your downloaded component into here, right-click that component, hit Properties, and then there's going to be a little box that shows up called Unblock. What you're going to want to do is check that box, hit OK, and then you might have to restart your Grasshopper Rhino software to be able to use that tool. Okay, so now let's go back to the anatomy of how Grasshopper works. First thing you can do, you can click any of these tabs here, pick a component you want, and drop it into the space. You can also type it, which I usually do, and drop it in the canvas. Click the right button on your mouse to drag your canvas, and then you can middle click your mouse to do different shortcuts, which we can talk about later. The basic component types in Grasshopper are the general components. These ones usually do the action. So you can see here, this is the cylinder component. It has what's called inputs to the left here. So you can input a base plane, a radius, and a length. Usually what I do is I use a number slider for that input and drop it in here. So you can see here, there it is. And there's that cylinder. Next component is the container. This contains data. For example, here this shows it's empty. This is a point. These points you can use for inputs, you can use them for actions, etc. You can create a point in Grasshopper and plug it into this component and it'll give you a point, or you can model it in the 3D space. You can see I have that point there. Right click your component and hit set one point or set multiple points. Today we're just going to do one. Okay, so now if you could see that X, that is the assignment of this container component. So it's living in that space. What's nice about this is if you move the point in Rhino, it's also going to move that same value in the container component. Then you can use this to feed your inputs for your general components. We have the input, like I said earlier. You also have the output component. This is what comes out of your action. So this will generate a cylinder here, as you can see, and it has this output, which I'll plug into this panel here. It shows an untrimmed surface. You can see here this number slider, I input 35, and the output here shows 35, which is really helpful. Well, general tips for your visibility settings in the top right here. So this button shows no geometry. If you just want to see your Rhino geometry, this is helpful, and you can turn off all your Grasshopper geometry. This shows a wireframe mode. This is a Rhino setting, a Rhino visibility setting, but you can also adjust it in Grasshopper. And this shows your shaded preview geometry, which this is the one I usually keep on. Next, if you just want to show a preview of something within a window, for example, I'm going to click this. I'm going to select just my cylinder, and it's only going to show component. It's going to hide everything else outside this window. I never use this, so it's up to you if you want to use it. You can hit escape to get out of there. Next one is only draw preview geometry for selected objects. This is really helpful because as you start to model different things in your Grasshopper space, you're going to have a lot of different overlapping geometries like this plane, and it will get confusing. So if you click this button, it's only going to turn on what you have selected, which is really nice. Here, select two things, turn it off. And then the next one is your document preview settings. So as you can see here, my geometry, when not selected, it is red. And when I select it, it turns green, as this setting shows here. You can change that however you want it. Sometimes I do hot pink, just to be fun. Sometimes it gets confusing, so I usually just leave it the default red and green. Very festive. And then the last one, you can just change the preview mesh quality. I usually don't touch this either. I leave that one alone. So next thing, I'm going to share some tips for your Grasshopper space. This is my personal preference. You can do it however you want, but I will share what I do. So there is a debate about how you want to display your components, which is funny to me. If you want to show icons or if you want to show the full names of things. If you are not like me and you just want to show the icons, you click to your display, uncheck draw full names, and it'll just show kind of shortcuts for everything. This is a lot cleaner, so I get it, but I'm going to turn it on. Another thing you can do, there is a component you can get on Food for Rhino called bifocals. I really like this component. Basically what it does is it drops the name of each component above it in text form, which is pretty helpful. So if you want to turn off your draw full names, it's cleaner, I guess. The next one, if you are just a nerd like me and love dark mode on all of your stuff, what you can do is you can get the component Moonlight on Food for Rhino as well. Drop that in your space. See here, it's not doing anything because you need to tell it you want it to turn on. And the way you do that is you grab a Boolean toggle. This Boolean toggle just toggles between true and false. So I'm going to toggle it to true and plug it into my Moonlight. And look, I have dark mode. which is just really fun. I love this. It's very spooky too for Halloween. I'm going to turn that off right now though, so things don't get confusing. Overall, ways components work, you can, if you don't want a component on, like say you have a lot of different examples in your space, you can select a couple components, right click, and disable them. So they're not on right now, they're not working. You can also turn them off. If you want to change your visibility per component, you can do that as well. Just turn off specific components. Another tip for Grasshopper is if you want to find the location of a certain component, click the component, hit Control plus Alt, and it'll show you exactly where it lives. So you can see here it lives under the surface component, under primitive cylinder. So you can also click it and drop it in your space. This is super helpful because you can see what tab each component lives in if you need to reference it. Okay, so we're going to continue with the cylinder. We're going to build a cylinder with this component here. I'm going to kind of go to the right to make it less cluttery. Okay, so as you can see here, we have these inputs. It is giving us a basic input for this cylinder. So you can see it has, for its radius, it already has 0.5 built in. For its length, it has 1. For its base, it has an XY plane here. I'm going to leave the XY plane because I don't want to change the direction of it. For the radius, I'm going to want to change it. So it's 0.5 right now. So let's say I want 5. There's 2 different ways to input a number. You can do a number slider here. The way to get this number slider, you literally just type a number and it'll pop up. You can double click this number slider and adjust the different settings within it. Right now, we're going to keep integer numbers. You can pick different rounding for your numbers if you want. You can change your minimum, which is 0, to your maximum, which is 10. If you want to add a larger range, you can change it here. And then your value, you can also change it here. If you want to add decimal points, you can hit this rounding here and change the amount of digits that would be within that decimal. I'm going to keep it as whole numbers right now. Okay, so once you have your input, you're going to connect it to your general component. So what you're going to do is you're going to drag the end here and connect it to that input. So you can see here, now we have a new geometry popping up. You can see here there's this wire that connects the 2 components, almost like an old telephone. You're still seeing the old cylinder, which is what I was talking about earlier. It can get kind of confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of our old process, right click, and hit disable to turn that off. Okay, so now you just see the geometry we're working with right now. For the length, so this shows the cylinder height. I want to change it to 10. So like I said, you can do a number slider, hit 10. Another way to enter a number, you can click your panel here. This panel is pretty helpful. It's a helpful little, like, I call it like a sticky note. Basically what you can do, you can enter a number. If you think it's going to be stagnant, it's not going to change, you can enter 15 here and plug it into an input. Or what else this panel can do is it can read you your outputs. So it tells you what this component is creating. Grasshopper hygiene, we always recommend to use these panels to kind of check as you're going through your Grasshopper script. Now I don't want it to be a panel because I want to be able to change it. So I'm going to change to the 10. And then you can see here we can move it along and we'll change the height according to the number in the number slider, which is really interesting. This allows you to kind of play with different options with a slider. You can also add it into 2 inputs if you would like as well, and it's going to change both of them. So you can see here now we have a cylinder, and that panel was telling us it is an untrimmed surface. So we're going to want to cap that surface. So you're going to type cap holes. So it's going to take that prep, and then it's going to cap it. So we're going to take that same panel, and we're going to feed the new output from this component into that panel. And it's going to tell us we have a closed VREP, which is great. Like I said here, you can preview, you can turn off a preview of the old geometry so it's not confusing. And you can just show your closed VREP cylinder here. And this guy you can actually use for 3D printing because it's technically a watertight geometry. Some things you can do for Grasshopper hygiene. This is me being a little specific, but I always like to try to make my wires short and close to each other and straight. Once you move, if you start moving your components like this, it's going to become spaghetti and it's going to get really confusing to see your process for how you built something. So I highly recommend doing things left to right, short and straight here. You can also group things together. So say we want to keep this as a process. Right click, hit group, and then it's going to become one group and you can move it around. You can also right click and name the group. There. Another thing you can do, if you want to name your component specific things, you select the component, right click, change the name number slider to radius and length. Like I said, for Grasshopper hygiene, and that is how you create a basic geometry. Okay, so today we're going to be creating this unique parametric form based on a video I saw by Architutors. It was like one of the first tutorials I followed a couple years ago when I started really using Grasshopper, and I think it's really helpful. And I will link the tutorial below. So let's get started. First thing you're going to want to do, we're going to base this parametric form based on a curve. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to create a curve in your Rhino 3D space. That's going to be the path that form follows. Do a little like, whoop-de-doo-doo-doo. Cool. So that is my curve there. So we're going to assign that curve in the Grasshopper space. We're going to type curve. As you can see, it's empty. I'm going to right click, set one curve, and grab that curve I just modeled there. Another shortcut you can do if you were like really zoomed out and you want to zoom into your geometry, right click your component, middle click, and hit zoom. There. The way I like to create things in Grasshopper is I like to think the steps it would take me to do it in Rhino. So first we have that curve that we created. Next, we're going to want to divide our curve into different sections to have planes sitting in those sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type divide curve. So you can see here the inputs are curve, count, and kinks. I'm going to grab my curve, feed it to that component. You can see for the count is 10. I'm going to want to split it up into a lot more different slices. So I'm going to type 40. Okay, so now I have that curve divided into 40 segments. Next, I'm going to want to have planes that follow that curve to slice it up. So I'm going to type a plane, but I'm going to do an XZ plane because I want it in the X and Z direction versus the X and Y. So I'm going to feed those points into that plane, and as you can see, it's slicing it up in the direction I want. Next, I'm going to want those planes to host polygons. So wherever a plane is, a polygon's going to go. Pick those planes and feed it to my polygons. I'm also going to hide these. So I'm going to select these and preview them off so it gets less confusing. So you can see I have my polygons here. However, I want to mess with the amount of segments and their radii. So I'm going to do for my radii, I want to do maybe like a 3. I can play with that radius, but I'm going to do 3. Okay, for the segments, maybe say you want to do an octagon. You can type 8 there, and then all of your polygons turn into an octagon. I think I might do 5. 6? Let's do 6. Why not? Okay, and I'm going to leave the fillet radius because I'm going to mess with that later. Okay, next I'm going to want to rotate each polygon slightly as it goes down the curve. So what I would mainly do in Rhino is grab each one and rotate it a few degrees, which would take a long time. So what's great about Grasshopper is they can do that for you. So you're going to feed it its geometry, which is those polygons we have. For the angle, I'm going to want the angle to be in degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click that input and change it to degrees here. Next, I'm going to add a series. So I'm going to have a series of numbers so it slightly rotates as you go down the curve. So say I want it to tilt like 4 degrees per polygon. So I'm going to enter 4, put it in the step. So it steps every number, steps 4 degrees, and feed it into that angle. As you can see, it made a mistake. It went in the wrong direction, and that's because the plane is for the XY plane. So we're going to grab this XZ plane we had originally and put it in there. And after, it like slightly turns. Like I said, I'm going to preview this off to make it less confusing. So you can see you kind of can mess with the degree you want it to turn. If you want it to turn even more, you can like just go for it. Okay, great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to grab each curve and we're going to want to cut each curve as it goes down the spine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my geometry, which is a bunch of polyline curves, and I'm going to explode them. Okay, so it's going to take each curve and explode them, and you can see now that it's exploded by each corner, each point. Is we're going to want to select a specific part of those curves and remove them from the space. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to type co-index. So this removes indexed elements from a list. It takes all of the segments you have, puts them in a list. So you're going to grab the indices. You're going to feed it a number. So let's say I'm picking 4. And you're going to see it's removing that index from that list. It's a little confusing. This stuff kind of confuses me as well. So it's just really helpful to see the number slider, just to visually picture it and move that number slider and see what geometry it removes. So you can see that there. So it's removing that portion from the list. That makes sense. I'll show you. If you want, you can go through and see this list. So if you see the before and after, it takes all the lines, explodes them, turns them into a list, and then it removes one of those lines from that list. So you can see previously it had 0 through 5, now it has 0 through 4 because we removed this specific index from the list. Now we just have a bunch of exploded curves and we're going to want to join them. Take all those curves, feed it into join curves, and now we're going to have a bunch of join polyline curves. Like I said, if you look at the list before and after, it took each segment from those polygons, joined them together into one curve. The edges are pretty sharp, so I'm going to want to fillet them. This is so funny. For my whole career, I kept saying fillet. I kept thinking like, oh, you fillet the curve like a steak. But it's fillet, I'm pretty sure. Okay, anyway, I digress. I want to fillet those curves to clean them up, make them a little bit softer. So you can see here, it's not really doing anything. We have to feed the curves to that component, and then we have to give it a radius that we want that fillet to be. So I'm going to pick 1.5. Okay, so if I turn off, I previewed these off, you can see now that it's more curvy, and you can change that. I'm going to change mine next to 2. And then I'm going to bring up those digits, those decimal digits, so you can have more freedom in your fillet values. Let's keep it at 1. Okay, so now our form is taking shape. I'm going to want to create an edge surface. So I'm going to take those curves, I'm going to offset them, just like you would in the normal rhino space. Feed it to that. You can see they're offsetting. And for distance, maybe I will do, I don't want it to offset that much. So I'm going to do distant 0.5. Make sure they're aligned, because when you create a surface, you want it to be aligned in the right direction. We're going to make sure it's in that XZ plane we had before. Okay, perfect. And then I'm going to leave the corners. Now I'm going to create an edge surface based on those curves. So I'm going to grab this edge surface here. It's going to take the curves from the fillet, and then it's going to take the curves from the offset for curve B. And as you can see, it made the surfaces. Say you want it to be less of an offset, you can play with that slider back here for the offset curve distance. Now we have our surfaces. Again, I'm going to preview these off just to make it cleaner. Now that we have our flat surfaces, it looks cool, looks like a little tunnel, but we're going to want to extrude them to give it dimension, right? We're going to take those edge surfaces and we're going to extrude them. So grab those surfaces as the base. Then you're going to pick the direction you want that extrude to be. It's not going to be the plane component we were using before. It's instead going to be a unit. So I'm going to want to extrude it in the Y. Because if you look from the top, it is going in the Y direction, which is that green line you see there. So I'm typing in the Y. This is a unit to kind of show which direction you want it to go in. Aha, see? So it went in that Y direction we were talking about. I want to adjust the thickness of each of these extrudes though. So what you're going to do is you can feed a number slider before that Y to tell it how much you want it to extrude in that direction. So you can see it shrunk a little bit and you can mess with it here. It overlaps here, so I'm just going to keep it to 0.5. So now we have our extrusions. And lastly, we're going to change how we're previewing those extrusions. So you're going to pick a custom preview. This lets you customize how you're previewing that specific geometry. So you can see it's pink. I'm going to turn these off. Also change the material with the color swatch. See, now it's white. And I want it to be hot pink dough. Oh. And there you go. There is your parametric form. So if we can go back, what's great about Grasshopper is after you build your geometry, sorry, it's really big, I'm gonna lower it. After you build your geometry, you can still play with it. You can mess around with it. You can change it versus if you model in a 3D space in Rhino, once you build it, you have to go back, explode things, and adjust. What's great is we can go back to the beginning and I decide, actually, I want there to be more pieces to this parametric form. So I can add to it. Now I have 59 pieces. And you think, okay, actually, I want it in octagon. Now it's an octagon, check that out. And then you can change that degree in which it was being rotated. And then you can change what curves you are removing from your list. There. And then you can also change your fillet. I go a little slow. And there you have it. There is your parametric form. Isn't that cool? And it's all based on this little curve. So if you go back and you decide you want this curve to change a little bit, if you adjust this curve, your geometry will follow that, which is so cool. Like, this is the stuff that blows my mind here. Once you have your geometry, if you want it in the 3D Rhino space, you're going to select your last output, right click, and hit bake. It's kind of funny that it's like an egg because you don't really bake eggs, but I thought it should be like a pizza or something. But you're going to hit bake, and it's going to bake your geometry in the 3D space here. And there you have it. You have each piece existing in Rhino, which is really, really cool. That's my basic tutorial for Grasshopper. Let me know if you have any questions below, if you have a specific thing you want to see, or anything like that. And thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day.